I had just come out of surgery, weak and still sore, when I texted my daughter to pick me up. Her reply was only 2 words. Call Uber. Sitting there, watching other families rush in with flowers and warm hugs, the empty chair next to me cut deeper than any scar. It hurt, but I stayed quiet. That silence gave me time to notice something strange. A hidden envelope slipped into my hospital bag with my name on it. Inside wasn't comfort, but betrayal. Documents with my forged signature. Proof of a plan to take everything I had worked for. They thought I was too old to notice. They thought silence meant defeat. But I had been preparing a kind of silence sharper than any blade. What came next would shake my family to its core. Stay with me until the end of this story, and comment the city you're watching from, so I know how far my voice still carries. The hospital air carried that sterile chill that seeps into the bones. A nurse wheeled me slowly down the corridor, her sneakers squeaking softly against the tile. The gallbladder surgery had left me drained, my side sore, every step borrowed from someone stronger than I felt at 70. She smiled kindly, but her eyes were tired, ready for her next patient. When we reached the glass doors at the exit, I pulled my phone from my pocket, hands still shaky from anesthesia, and sent a short message to Marla. I'm ready to be picked up. The reply came within seconds, brisk and cold. Call an Uber. The words cut sharper than the surgeon's scalpel. I stared at the glowing screen, half expecting another message, a hint of humor, an apology, something to soften the blow. Nothing came, just that curt dismissal. My daughter, who I once cradled through fevers, who I drove to dance recitals, had reduced me to a ride-share app. The nurse parked my wheelchair by a row of chairs near the sliding doors. Someone will be here soon? She asked gently. I nodded, unable to admit the truth. My eyes drifted to the seat beside me. Empty. Waiting. As people filed past with their families, wives steadied husbands, children carried balloons, grandchildren chattered while tugging on coats. My chair remained alone. The emptiness pressed heavier than my own bandaged body. In the back of my mind, Elaine's voice lingered. My late wife never would have left me like this. She would have been there, brushing stray hair off my forehead, scolding the nurse for wheeling me too quickly. The sight of that empty chair carved a hollow place inside me. I tried to rationalize. Maybe Marla was busy with Clara's schoolwork, or Darren had the car. I repeated these excuses like prayers, but each one crumbled as quickly as I formed it. Memories rose uninvited. Late nights signing tuition checks, handing over a down payment for her first home, watching her smile while telling friends her father always came through. Yet when I needed her most, her reply had been no warmer than a winter draft. I thought of Opal Ridley, the neighbor across the street who sometimes brought over a casserole on Sundays. She would have driven me home in a heartbeat, no questions asked. Strange, I mused, how sometimes kindness lived next door while cruelty grew under your own roof. With a sigh, I pulled my jacket tighter and dialed for a cab instead of following Marla's suggestion. Uber felt too much like what she wanted, for me to be handled quickly, conveniently, with no personal touch. A taxi, at least, gave me a small choice of my own. As I waited, my mind slipped back to Elaine. She used to warn me, don't let Marla's sharpness cut you too deep. She's got my stubborn streak, but none of the softness. I had brushed her off then, too hopeful, too blind in a father's pride. Now those words echoed with painful clarity. The cab arrived with a quiet honk. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, stepped out, lifted my small overnight bag, and waited patiently as I struggled into the back seat. His small gestures, holding the door, adjusting the seatbelt, were the kind I once expected naturally from family. To find them in a stranger felt both comforting and shameful. As the car pulled away, the city lights flickered across the windows. I clutched Elaine's old scarf, still carrying her faint perfume after all these years. The wool pressed against my cheek, a reminder that love once lived here, even if it had grown absent in my daughter's heart. Outside. Autumn leaves swirled across the sidewalks, carried by a cold Ohio wind. The cab's heater hummed, but no warmth reached the ache inside. Looking out at the blur of lights, words escaped under my breath, nearly a whisper meant only for Elaine's memory. I've become invisible in my own family. And then I saw it, an envelope sticking out of my hospital bag, my name scrawled on the front in handwriting I didn't recognize. The house was quiet when I came back from the hospital, that kind of stillness that presses on your ears. The bag from the hospital sat on the kitchen table, its straps twisted, as though it had something to hide. The envelope poked out just like I had seen it in the cab, waiting for me, daring me. Fatigue pressed on my shoulders, but curiosity kept me in that chair long after I should have been resting. The paper was stiff between my fingers, the kind of weighty envelope hospitals use for discharge forms. But when I slid it open, the first page I saw wasn't a medical chart. It was a financial document, bold letters across the top. Mortgage agreement. My name was there, Lowell Kincaid, scrawled as a cosigner beside Marla and Darren. The air caught in my throat. I hadn't agreed to this. I read on, pulse picking up, numbers, balances, signatures, my signature, or something that looked like it. The handwriting was close enough, sloppy in spots, like mine had been when my hands shook from medication. I shut my eyes and tried to remember. Had Marla slid papers under my nose when I wasn't paying attention? She had asked for my signature a few times, always breezy about it. Just a form for the bank. Dad, nothing to worry about. The words replayed like a taunt. I pushed the papers aside, rubbed my temples, and tried to breathe. Elaine's voice rose up in memory, clear as if she were across the table. Lowell, read everything before you sign, even if it's from your own daughter. I had brushed her off then, sure that family didn't trick family. And now here I was, staring at pages that carried my name into a deal I never agreed to. As I flipped through, something else caught my eye. Attachments clipped to the back, medical notes, supposedly from my file, claiming I was mentally and physically unfit to manage financial responsibilities. My stomach turned. The ink might as well have been poison. Lies dressed up as truth. I went to the drawer, pulled out my real hospital records from last week, and set them side by side. The differences were glaring. One called me unfit. The real one said I was stable, alert, cleared for surgery. Someone had forged this. And it wasn't just sloppy, it was calculated. I sank into the chair, my chest heavy. Elaine would have been crushed. She had always believed that, no matter her sharp edges. Marla had goodness in her. To see our daughter's name tied to this betrayal, it would have split her heart. I pressed my hand to the scarf draped across the back of the chair, her scarf, and felt a pang so deep it made my eyes sting. The kitchen walls felt too tight. I shoved the papers into a neat stack and stepped outside for air. The autumn wind carried the smell of leaves, crisp and earthy. Across the yard, the light in Opal Ridley's window flicked on. Moments later, she came out to her porch, pulling her sweater close. She noticed me standing there, pale and shaken. "Lowell, are you all right?" Her voice carried genuine concern, the kind I hadn't heard from my own flesh and blood in too long. I hesitated, then admitted. "Found something I shouldn't have, papers with my name on them. I never signed." Opal's brows knit together. "I probably shouldn't say this, but I once overheard Marla at the pharmacy. She said something about papers Dad won't remember signing. It stuck with me. I thought maybe I misheard, but now..." She let the thought trail off, her eyes soft with sympathy. The words hit me like a second blow. So it wasn't just a mistake. It was intentional. I nodded, unable to speak, and went back inside. The documents were still spread across the table, lit under the kitchen lamp. My phone buzzed, rattling against the wood. The name on the screen made my throat dry. Marla. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if answering my daughter's call was the right thing to do. The phone had rung so long it felt like it was mocking me. Each chime was a demand, tugging at a place inside that still wanted to believe my daughter might care. Against better judgment, I answered. "Dad, we need to talk about the paperwork." Marla's voice shot out, brisk and cold, no greeting, no pause to ask about the surgery, the pain, the ride home I'd had to arrange myself. Just paperwork, deadlines, numbers. A heaviness settled in the pit of my stomach. I had braced myself for disappointment, but this, it was sharper than the gallbladder incision I was still nursing. I asked her directly, trying to keep my voice steady. Why is my name on those mortgage documents? I never agreed to that. Her tone didn't falter. You're overreacting. It's for the family. Dad, Darren and I needed things to move quickly. And it's not like it hurts you. You should be glad we're handling the important stuff now. The words sliced. The family's good had become her shield for every decision that cut me out. And in that moment, the realization sank in. She had been slowly edging me out of the circle of authority. The head of the table turned into an empty chair, and she sat comfortably in my place. Before I could push further, another voice cut in. Darren's, patronizing, smooth. Lowell, you need to rest. Let us handle this. We've got everything under control. The way he said my first name, not Dad, not Father, was a declaration. My role had been rewritten. They were the caretakers. I, the frail shadow in the corner. Elaine's voice came back to me then, from years ago, in the quiet of our bedroom after Marla had stormed out over some teenage slight. She always needs control. Low. Don't let her mistake that hunger for love. At the time, I thought Elaine was being too hard on her. Now I knew better. I tried a different route, clinging to the one bond I thought couldn't be twisted. And Clara? Has she even asked about me? The pause was short but deadly. Clara doesn't need confusing stories right now, Marla said flatly. She doesn't need to be upset with Grandpa's worries. She's fine where she is. It hit me harder than any financial betrayal could. She wasn't just siphoning my name into papers and lies. She was carving away my granddaughter's love. One dismissive word at a time. I ended the call before my voice cracked. The silence afterward rang louder than the phone ever had. My eyes drifted to the refrigerator, where Clara's crayon drawing still clung to a magnet. A crooked little house, a stick figure with Grandpa scrawled above it. That drawing was my anchor, my vow. No matter how Marla twisted the story, Clara would know who I was. She would remember the truth. I sat at the kitchen table, hands trembling as I poured tea. The papers lay spread in front of me, each page a wound, each signature a scar I didn't remember agreeing to. If they thought I'd stay silent, I whispered to no one. They were wrong. But first, I needed to know just how deep their betrayal went. Morning light slipped reluctantly through the blinds, but it did nothing to ease the weight pressing down on me. The night had been long, restless. Sleep never quite came. Each time I closed my eyes, Marla's voice replayed in my head, flat and businesslike, as though I were nothing more than an obstacle to her deadlines. The papers still sat on my kitchen table, spread open like a wound I couldn't ignore. I pulled them closer, letting my tired eyes scan the pages once more. That was when I saw it, an account number. My breath caught. I read it twice, 3 times. The digits imprinting themselves in my mind. It wasn't random. It tied directly to Marla's joint account with Darren. It was her hand in plain ink, her name inked into my unraveling trust. A heaviness settled over me. Betrayal had always seemed like something that happened to other families, not mine, not the daughter Elaine and I raised with so much hope. But here it was, staring back at me. By mid-morning, I found myself dialing Ronan Drexler's number. It had been years since we last sat together, my old friend and lawyer, but if anyone could see through this mess, it was Ronan. His voice cracked with surprise when he picked up, but when I asked for a discreet meeting, he didn't hesitate. We met at a small cafe a few blocks from my house, a place where the sound of clinking mugs and the hum of conversation could cover the weight of our words. I slid the documents across the table to him, my fingers reluctant to let go. Ronan adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages slowly, methodically, his brow tightening with each line. "Lowell," he finally said, lowering his voice. "This isn't a mistake. If this is real, your daughter and her husband could face criminal charges, fraud, forgery." The words cut deeper than I thought possible. My child, the little girl whose scraped knees I bandaged, whose college bills I carried on my shoulders, now standing on the other side of the law, against me. Ronan leaned forward, his tone sharp. And it may not stop here. If they've already laid this groundwork, they could be moving toward guardianship, declaring you unfit, taking control of everything, your home, your accounts, your freedom. A chill ran through me. I had been focused on the money, the signatures, but Ronan's warning revealed something worse. This wasn't just about dollars. It was about erasing me, stripping away the last of my independence until I was little more than a name on a form. Elaine's face came to me in that moment, as vivid as if she sat across the cafe table. I remembered her voice, gentle yet insistent. Marla has always needed control. Lowell, don't let her take too much. I had dismissed it then, chalked it up to a mother's worry. Now, regret burned in my chest. I'd been blind, maybe willfully so. Ronan touched my arm. I'll start gathering what we need, quietly. But you must be careful, Lowell. They'll try to make you doubt yourself. That's their leverage. Relief mingled with bitterness. Relief that I wasn't crazy. That someone else saw what I saw. Bitterness that it had come to this. Me, a father, plotting defense against his own blood. When I left the cafe, the air felt heavier than when I'd gone in. On the sidewalk, I nearly collided with Opal Ridley, my neighbor and the closest thing to a guardian angel this side of heaven. She smiled warmly at first, then her eyes narrowed as she took in my face. You doing all right, Lowell? You look like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders. I tried to offer a casual answer, but she pressed on. Funny thing, Marla was chatting with some of the neighbors last week. Said you weren't handling things well these days. Forgetting things, misplacing bills. Folks worry, you know. The words sank like stones in my stomach. Ronan's warning echoed instantly. Marla was already spreading the story, painting me as frail, incapable, piece by piece. She was shaping a world where her betrayal would look like protection. I forced a smile for Opal, thanked her, and walked home with my legs heavier than before. Back at my kitchen table, I set the papers down once more. My hand brushed over the signatures, the falsehoods, the cracks in trust. She wants my life signed away, I whispered, the walls hearing what no one else could, but silence could be more dangerous than shouting. Silence, wielded right, could be sharper than any blade. If they thought I was too weak to notice, too tired to resist, they were wrong. For the first time in years, I felt wide awake. The living room was dark except for the dim lamp beside me. My phone sat on the table, screen glowing with Marla's name. For years I had been the one who softened my tone, begged for understanding, lowered my voice so as not to sound like a burden. Tonight, that man was gone. My hand trembled when I picked up the phone, but the words that came out were steady, almost foreign to me. Marla, we need to talk. Tonight. There was a pause on her end, the kind that usually forced me to fill the silence with apologies. This time, I didn't. Finally, she answered, clipped and annoyed. Fine. Come by if you must. I hung up without another word. The line had been drawn. Her house was all polished stone and spotless windows, the kind of place that screamed success from the street. I remembered writing the check years ago to help with their down payment. Tonight, it looked more like a fortress than a home. Marla opened the door wearing that businesslike smile that never reached her eyes. Dad, she said, the word so flat it carried no warmth. Inside, the air smelled of new leather and disinfectant, cold, lifeless. I stood in her foyer and pulled the documents from my coat pocket. My voice cut sharper than I'd intended. Why is my name on forged papers? She stiffened, then gave a laugh that was more insult than humor. You signed them, Dad. You just don't remember. Darren stepped into the room, holding a glass of whiskey. He leaned against the wall like a man watching a show. You're not as sharp as you used to be. That's just age. We're trying to help you. The way he smirked made my stomach turn. For a moment, the room spun. It wasn't just about money. It was about my dignity, my independence. everything Elaine and I had built together. The two of them weren't satisfied with my silence. They wanted my signature to erase me from my own life. I steadied myself and said the words I knew would strike them. I've already spoken to Ronan Drexler. He's seen the papers. He knows what you're doing. For a heartbeat, Marla's eyes widened. The mask slipped. Then it was back, ice and fury. "You went behind my back?" she hissed. "After everything I've done for this family, you betray me?" Her voice echoed through the house. From down the hallway, Clara's laughter floated in, bright and innocent. The sound sliced right through me. That little girl still saw me as her grandpa, not the senile fool Marla was painting. She was the reason I had to stand firm. "You keep this up," I said, my tone steady, "and the truth will come out in court, every forged page, every lie." Marla's face hardened. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "If you fight us, Dad, you'll lose Clara too. Do you want her growing up thinking you were dangerous, senile, forgetful? Because that's the story I'll tell." The cruelty in those words should have broken me. Instead, something settled inside me, an iron resolve. I realized then that they had already taken enough. If I let fear rule me, I would lose not only Clara, but myself. I turned and walked toward the door, refusing to let them see my hands shake. Outside, the night air hit like a cleansing wind. For the first time in years, my head lifted higher, my back a little straighter. "They thought fear would silence me," I muttered under the porch light, "but they'd forgotten I had nothing left to lose." Sleep never came easy after the night at Marla's house. Every time my eyes shut, her words echoed, sharp, dismissive, stripping away what little trust was left. By dawn, I sat at my desk, a stack of papers spread out before me. Elaine's old notes, carefully written, every number balanced, every date aligned, were a balm against the chaos. Her handwriting was steady, certain, unlike the jagged mess Marla had shoved in front of me. As the morning light crept across the desk, I pulled out one of Elaine's folders I hadn't opened in years. Inside were records of a loan I'd once helped with, clear, signed, documented. And then it hit me. The so-called mortgage Marla claimed I'd signed bore dates that overlapped with these older documents. Elaine had filed everything, neat and perfect. This wasn't just sloppy paperwork, it was a contradiction, proof that something had been forged. The weight of discovery settled deep in my chest. Elaine had been gone for years, but it was as though she'd left this file for me to find, her final shield, her last warning. By mid-morning, I sat across from Ronan Drexler at his office, the blinds half drawn against the sun. His hair was grayer than when we'd last spent afternoons fishing, but his eyes were sharp as ever. I slid the papers across the polished desk. He leaned in, brow furrowing as he compared signatures. "Lowell, these aren't just questionable. They're wrong. Whoever did this, they didn't even bother to match pressure patterns. See here, the loops, the angles. They don't belong to the same hand." "Marla says I signed them," I muttered. The words stung worse spoken aloud. Ronan's lips pressed thin. "She's building a case, Lowell. If she and Darren are pushing this, they're laying groundwork to have you declared unfit. Once that happens, you won't have a say in your own affairs." The room went still. My heart beat hard against my ribs. Losing money was one thing. Losing control of my life, that was worse than death. "She wants to erase me alive," I whispered. Ronan's gaze softened, but his tone stayed firm. "Then we don't play scared. We build the case first, quietly. We gather evidence. We let them hang themselves with their own rope." The plan formed between us, steady and deliberate. Ronan would catalog every discrepancy. He'd contact handwriting experts discreetly, and me, I'd listen, observe, document. Proof, not rage, would be my weapon. Later that afternoon, I walked down the block to clear my head. Opal Ridley, watering her geraniums, waved me over. She studied me for a moment, reading the exhaustion in my face. Marla stopped by the other day, she said gently. Told Mrs. Henderson across the street that you've been, well, not handling things well. That you're forgetful. Slipping. The words slid into me like ice water. It was happening. She wasn't just attacking on paper. She was sculpting a story for the world to believe. Opal's hand rested briefly on my arm. I don't buy it, but others might. If you need me to say what I've heard, I will. Her loyalty was a lifeline. I nodded, swallowing the bitter lump in my throat. That evening, I tried calling Clara, just to hear her voice, to remind myself there was still innocence left in this family. The phone rang, and for a moment, I hoped. Then Marla's voice cut in. Dad, Clara doesn't need confusion. She knows you're not well. Her tone was ice. Final. I froze. She wasn't just cutting me off. She was planting seeds in Clara's mind, painting me as senile, fragile, useless, a man to be pitied, not respected. When the line went dead, the house felt colder than ever. I sat in my office. Elaine's photo watching from the shelf. The forged papers lay before me. Elaine's file beside them like a sword in its sheath. If they wanted to strip me of my mind, I murmured into the silence, they'd first have to silence the truth I carried. The call from Marla came on a gray Saturday morning. Her voice clipped and formal. She said it was time for a family discussion. I could tell from her tone that this wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Something in my gut told me not to go, but she mentioned Clara would be there, and that alone was enough to push me into my coat. The drive over felt heavier than it should have. Every mile closer to Marla's house tightened the knot in my stomach. By the time I pulled into her perfectly trimmed driveway, I already knew this wasn't going to be a conversation about reconciliation. Darren opened the door, smiling in a way that felt more like mockery than welcome. Inside, the living room looked staged, papers stacked neatly on the coffee table, a notary waiting with a clipboard, and two men I didn't recognize. Later I learned they were Darren's business partners. The air carried the weight of formality, like I had stumbled into a courtroom disguised as a home. Marla sat on the sofa, Clara beside her. My granddaughter looked small, her wide eyes darting nervously from me to her mother. The sight pierced deeper than any document ever could. Marla cleared her throat, lifting a sheet of paper, and began to read as if she were delivering a closing argument. Dad, she said, not looking at me, Darren and I believe you're no longer capable of managing your financial or personal affairs. Her voice was steady, cold. Each word stripped away another layer of the father-daughter bond we once shared. Clara shifted in her seat, her little hands twisting together. She had no idea what all these papers meant, but I could see the unease in her face. She'd been told to sit there and nod along. The weight of manipulation sat heavy on her shoulders, far too much for a child to carry. Darren chimed in, laying out what he called proof. He held up medical notes, claiming they showed I was unfit, that my recent surgery had left me too weak and forgetful. The words blurred in my mind as I watched his lips move. I knew the notes were twisted, manufactured to serve their narrative. Elaine's voice drifted back from memory, her warning long ago. They'll try to erase your voice when they can't control your hands. My heart thudded in my chest, not from fear, but from anger I kept buried beneath a calm exterior. Then came the cruelest part. Marla turned to Clara. Sweetheart, tell Grandpa it's okay, she urged softly, her hand gripping the child's shoulder. Tell him you've noticed how he forgets things. Clara hesitated, her lips trembling. For a brief, shining moment she whispered, He's always been there for me. The words barely escaped before Marla cut her off, her face stiff with fury. That single whisper told me everything. Clara's heart hadn't yet been poisoned completely. I sat still, my silence louder than any protest. They wanted me rattled, shouting, reduced to a caricature of incompetence. Instead, I let their performance play out. Every slip, every manipulation, every forced word was a crack in their facade. When it was over, Darren slid the papers toward me. Just sign, Lowell, he said, the smirk never leaving his lips. It's what's best for everyone. I looked at Clara, then back at the stack of lies in front of me. Slowly, I pushed the papers away. My voice was steady. No. The room froze. I stood, my dignity intact, and walked toward the door without another word. They thought they'd broken me in that room, but all they'd done was reveal how far they were willing to fall. Ronan's call came early in the morning, his voice steady but weighted. He said the documents were ready, everything we needed to expose what Marla and Darren had done. I set the phone down slowly, my palms resting against the kitchen table where Elaine's old checkbook still sat. For a moment I pictured her across from me, tapping her pen, reminding me that truth always outlasts lies. The ache of missing her was still sharp, but that ache had become the backbone of my resolve. And I slid on my coat, my breath catching as I thought of Clara. She was my anchor through this storm, the only piece of innocence left in a house that had turned against me. Whatever happened today, I needed her to know her grandfather wasn't the fool her mother wanted her to believe. The law office sat on a corner downtown, tall windows letting the late afternoon light pour in. Ronan had chosen his ground well, neutral, professional, impossible for Marla to twist into another staged ambush. When I stepped inside, the chill of the fall air clung to my jacket, but it was the sight before me that froze me in place. Marla and Darren were already seated, their posture smug, eyes darting between each other like co-conspirators rehearsing a lie. They wore the look of people who believed they had cornered a man too tired to fight. Ronan greeted me warmly, guiding me to a chair across from them. He wasted no time. With measured precision, he laid out 2 sets of papers, one with my authentic signature, pulled from documents Elaine had carefully stored, and another set showing the jagged forgeries Marla had submitted. Side by side, Ronan said evenly. The difference is obvious. Marla's lips pressed tight. Anyone can make mistakes signing their name, she snapped, but her voice faltered halfway through. Darren leaned forward, his hand heavy on the table. He's just confused. You're feeding into his paranoia. I stayed silent, watching the cracks spread. Years of holding my tongue had taught me silence could be sharper than any rebuttal. Ronan pressed on. Mr. Kincaid isn't paranoid, he said, his eyes locking onto Darren. And he isn't alone. We have testimony. That was when he produced Opal Ridley's statement. My neighbor had written in detail what she overheard, Marla bragging about forging signatures, assuring Darren that Dad won't even know what he signed. The color drained from Marla's face. Darren shifted in his seat, muttering curses under his breath. Just then, the door opened, and Clara stepped hesitantly inside. My heart clenched at the sight of her small frame, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sweater. Clara, Marla said quickly, her voice dripping with urgency. Tell them Grandpa forgets things all the time. Tell them you've seen it. Clara's eyes flicked from her mother to me. Her lips trembled. For a moment I thought the pressure would break her. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, Grandpa remembers everything that matters. The room stilled. It was a child's voice, but it cut through the adult deception like a blade. Marla's facade cracked. Her hand slammed the arm of her chair, her rage breaking through. He's manipulating you, she barked, but the words landed weak, desperate. Ronan leaned forward, his final card ready. The hospital records, he said, sliding another folder across the table. They confirm Mr. Kincaid's recovery was normal. The claim he was medically unfit is false. There's your proof. Silence swelled. Darren's composure snapped. He pushed back his chair so hard it scraped against the floor. This is a joke, he spat, storming out of the room with a slam that rattled the windows. Marla sat trembling, her eyes darting between the documents, Opal's testimony, Clara's unwavering gaze. Every stone she had thrown had landed squarely at her own feet. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. Strength, I'd learned, wasn't in shouting, it was in outlasting. She had thrown her last stone, I thought quietly, watching her hands shake, and it had landed squarely at her own feet. The house was quiet the morning after the storm at Ronan's office. Quiet in a way that made every sound sharper, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the old refrigerator, even the faint chatter of birds outside. I sat in my chair by the window, the documents spread across the table. My mind replayed every word, every denial, every tremor in Marla's voice when Ronan laid her forgeries side by side with the truth. Out on the street, I noticed small changes. A neighbor who usually waved to Marla while jogging passed by without so much as a glance. Two women who lived across the street spoke in hushed tones, their heads turning quickly when they saw me look out. The kingdom Marla had built in the neighborhood, the perfect daughter, the successful wife, the flawless mother, was beginning to show cracks. People may not have known all the details yet, but word was moving faster than she could control. By late afternoon, my phone rang. Her name lit up the screen. I hesitated before answering, but curiosity won out. "You made a fool of me," Marla spat the second I picked up. "Do you realize what you did to Darren? His business partners don't even want to take his calls. They think we're liars because of you." Her voice rose, each word laced with venom. I held the phone steady, not saying a word. Silence carried more weight than anything I could have said. The pause stretched long enough that she shouted again, "Say something." But I didn't. I let the silence answer for me. Eventually, she hung up, her fury cutting off like a slammed door. For the first time, I realized I no longer needed to defend myself. The truth was already working against her. That evening, a soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. When I opened the door, Clara stood there. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks red, and she clutched a little spiral notebook to her chest. "Grandpa," she whispered, stepping into the hallway. I didn't know who to believe anymore. Mom kept saying you forgot things. She told me you signed things you didn't remember. But after yesterday..." Her voice broke, and tears spilled down her face. "I know she's been lying. She wanted me to think you weren't safe to be around." I guided her inside, setting the kettle on while she curled up at the kitchen table. "Your grandma used to tell me," I said gently, "that the truth is like a candle in a dark room. It doesn't take much light to make the shadows run." Clara sobbed quietly, then pulled something from her notebook, a sketch of me and her, sitting together under the old oak tree in my yard. "I drew this weeks ago when Mom said you'd forget who I was, but you never did. Grandpa, you always remembered everything that mattered." Hearing that, a lump rose in my throat. I laid a hand on hers, steady and warm. "And I always will." For the first time in weeks, the fear that had gripped me loosened. Clara's trust was still mine, and that was a lifeline. A few days later, Opal caught me on the sidewalk as I fetched the morning paper. She glanced over her shoulder before leaning close. "Lowell, you need to know something. I overheard Marla and Darren talking on their porch last night. They're planning to liquidate your assets quickly, before the lawyers can stop them. She said, Dad won't even see it coming." The words hit like ice water down my back, but there was no shock, only confirmation. The betrayal had gone from private to absolute. "Thank you, Opal," I murmured. "That might be the peace we need." That afternoon, I drove to Ronan's office with the information. His jaw tightened when I told him. "We'll file an injunction right away," he said. "If they try to move on your property, the court will freeze it." By the next day, it was done. Papers filed, legal barriers raised. I returned home feeling lighter, though I knew the fight wasn't over. But Marla wasn't one to lose quietly. That evening, I heard the tires screeching before she stormed into my driveway. She stood at the foot of my porch, hair wild, face flushed with rage. "You think you've won?" she screamed, her voice carrying across the quiet neighborhood. "You're ruining your own family. Do you want everyone to see what a bitter old man you've become?" Doors opened up and down the street. Neighbors stepped onto porches, watching, some with crossed arms, some whispering. Darren wasn't with her. He never showed his face when things got ugly. I stood on the porch, saying nothing, just meeting her eyes. My silence made her angrier. She shouted accusations, wild claims, flailing her arms. But the more she spoke, the more she buried herself. Finally, when her voice cracked from shouting, she turned back toward her car. The door slammed, tires screeched again, and she was gone. I looked around at the faces of my neighbors. Some nodded at me quietly, others turned away uncomfortably. But one thing was clear. Marla's mask had slipped, and she could never put it back on. The night air felt cool against my face as I stepped back inside. My hands trembled, Not from fear, but from the weight of it all finally shifting. The walls around Marla's empire weren't just cracking, they were caving in, and she knew I was the one holding the hammer. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper. Sunlight streamed through high windows, catching dust motes that seemed suspended in time, much like the weight pressing on my shoulders. Elaine's words floated back to me. Stand firm. Lowell. Even when the ground shakes, your feet must not. That morning, I held on to them like a lifeline. Marla sat across the aisle, crisp in her tailored blazer, her arms crossed with the same defiance she used to display as a teenager when caught sneaking out past curfew. Darren sat beside her, jaw tight, whispering something in her ear that made her smirk. They looked so sure of themselves. To them, this was just another performance, but I wasn't the same man they thought they could corner in silence. When Ronan rose, his presence filled the room. Calm, methodical. He placed the first set of documents on the bench. Your Honor, these signatures are supposed to belong to my client, Lowell Kincaid, but when compared to authenticated samples of his writing, the discrepancies are glaring. The judge leaned closer as Ronan handed copies to the clerk. My own handwriting stared back at me, side by side with forgeries. The loops, the slants, small things only Elaine would have noticed in our younger years, and yet enough to expose the lies. Darren cleared his throat. This is absurd. He's mistaken. Old age makes him doubt what he's done. He signed those papers willingly. He just doesn't remember. Ronan's voice stayed steady. Then perhaps Mr. Vennet can explain why financial inconsistencies appear in his accounts, but not in Mr. Kincaid's, why funds are missing, withdrawn under the guise of medical incapacity. I kept my gaze forward, silent. It wasn't rage that carried me anymore. It was the quiet strength of finally being heard. The courtroom murmured as Darren shifted uncomfortably. Sweat glistened at his temples. For the first time, I saw fear prick through his polished mask. And then the door opened. Opal Ridley walked in, small but firm, carrying her nurse's tote. When Ronan called her name, she lifted her hand without hesitation. Mrs. Ridley, Ronan began. You live near Mr. Kincaid? Yes, she said, her voice clear. And I overheard Marla more than once talking about getting her father to sign papers he wouldn't understand. She laughed about how he'd never question her, that he trusted her too much. The gasp that swept through the courtroom was louder than I expected. Marla's face drained of color, her eyes darting toward Opal with daggers. She's lying. Marla's voice cracked. This woman has always hated me. Opal didn't flinch. I've taken care of your father after surgery, after long days when you weren't there. I know what I heard. You can deny it, but truth doesn't bend for comfort. Marla's composure fractured. Darren placed a hand on her arm, but she shook him off, her mask slipping in front of everyone. During recess, Clara found me in the hallway. She looked small in her school sweater, her eyes wide with worry. Grandpa, please, don't give up on Mom. She's wrong, but she's still my mother. Her voice trembled, carrying the innocence only a child could still hold in the middle of such ugliness. I rested a hand on her shoulder. I won't give up on you, Clara. No matter what happens, you'll always have me. I told her a story Elaine used to share, how family is a garden, and weeds may grow, but love is the soil that keeps it alive. Clara pressed her cheek against my chest, clinging tighter than ever before. When the judge returned, the air tightened again. Papers shuffled. The gavel struck wood lightly. Given the evidence of forged documents and questionable transfers, I am ruling to freeze Mr. Kincaid's assets until a full review can be conducted. Marla shot to her feet. This is a farce. He's always been weak, and now he's turning everyone against his own daughter. I rose slowly, my voice quiet, but carrying through the courtroom. You refused to be there when I needed you most. Now, the world sees the truth. I didn't destroy you. Marla, you did this yourself. Her face twisted in rage. tears brimming but never falling. Darren tugged at her sleeve, but she yanked away, shouting until the bailiff stepped closer. The judge struck the gavel hard. Silence fell heavy as stone. For the first time in months, the weight shifted off me, sliding squarely onto her shoulders. As I walked out of the courthouse, the autumn air hit like a cleansing wave. Elaine's scarf brushed against my chest, the same one I had clutched in the cab weeks earlier. This time, it didn't feel like an anchor of grief. It felt like a banner carried into victory. The gavel had fallen, but in my bones I knew this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning of the price Marla would pay. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears until it became its own kind of noise. I sat in my armchair, the papers from court still stacked on the table where I'd dropped them yesterday. The judge's ruling had gone in my favor, but there was no sweetness in the victory. It felt hollow, like a man who has defended his home only to find the family within already gone. The evening light settled across the living room, turning the framed photographs into shadowed silhouettes. Elaine's face stared back from one in particular, her smile frozen in a time when Marla still hugged me without hesitation, when Clara was just a toddler tugging at her mother's hand. I whispered to the photo, "I did what I had to do, but why does it feel like I lost anyway?" Hours later, the phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Marla. For a moment, I thought of letting it buzz itself into silence, but curiosity, or perhaps that old ache of paternal hope, made me answer. Her voice cracked like glass, sharp and trembling all at once. "You've destroyed us, Dad. Do you even understand what you've done? Everyone's talking. Darren's clients are walking away. You've made us into a laughingstock." I said nothing. "You wanted revenge. Fine, but you've torn this family apart. Do you feel proud of yourself?" She spat, and beneath the fury, I could hear it, the edge of fear, the sound of a woman who saw her world collapsing. I let the silence stretch until her voice faltered. She tried once more, softer, almost pleading. "Take it back. Please, Dad, we can fix this. Don't let them see us like this." Still, I said nothing. The only sound was the faint hum of the line between us. At last, I hung up. The house returned to its heavy quiet, but this time the silence felt like armor. The next afternoon, Clara slipped into my house, her backpack still hanging from one shoulder. She looked around nervously, as if afraid her mother would materialize from the shadows. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I don't know what to believe anymore." I guided her to the kitchen table. She looked so small, caught in the middle of something she never asked for. "Your mom says things that make me think you're confused. But I know you. You've always remembered my birthday. You've always been there." Tears welled in her eyes. "She says you're sick, that you don't remember things right." I reached across the table, taking her trembling hands. "Clara, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Families sometimes lose their way. But love, the kind your grandmother lived every day, that doesn't get erased." Her lip quivered, and I thought of Elaine again. I remembered how she once taught Clara to write her name, patient and proud, saying, "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without letting the pain own you." "Your grandmother would tell you this," I said softly. "You don't have to choose between your mother and me. You just have to remember who you are, and that you are loved, always." Clara threw her arms around me, her small voice muffled against my chest. "I'll stand by you, Grandpa, I promise." That promise was worth more than any verdict, but the storm outside hadn't quieted. Late that evening, as I was stepping onto the porch to take in some air, Darren's truck pulled into my drive. He climbed out fast, eyes wild, his voice carrying before he even reached me. "You think you've won? You've ruined us. Do you even care what you've done to your own daughter?" His words rained down like stones, but I didn't move. Neighbors peeked from their porches. Curtains fluttered as faces appeared in windows. Darren's voice grew louder, his accusations sloppier. until he was shouting more at the night air than at me. I stood still, hands behind my back, my gaze steady. His fury rolled off me like water against stone. The more I said nothing, the smaller he seemed, until finally he stormed back to his truck, his curses echoing as he sped away. I turned slowly, catching sight of my neighbor's watchful eyes. They didn't see a frail old man tonight. They saw a father standing firm. The following day, I walked to the park. The late afternoon sun draped the grass in gold, and children ran laughing around their grandparents. I watched, a quiet ache in my chest, and yet, also a measure of peace. This battle had never been about bank accounts or signatures. It was about dignity, about refusing to vanish into the silence Marla tried to paint around me. It was about making sure Clara grew up knowing her grandfather's love wasn't something that could be erased with lies. As I sat on the park bench, the pond reflecting streaks of fading daylight, I let the thoughts settle in. Forgiveness might never come. Marla's heart might stay hardened, Darren's pride unbroken. But peace was still mine to claim. I breathed in the cool air, let it fill my lungs, and closed my eyes. The courthouse had a different weight that morning. Its walls didn't feel like barriers, they felt like witnesses. As I stepped through the heavy wooden doors, the air smelled of polish and dust, and something inside me knew this was the day everything came full circle. My legs ached from the cold Cincinnati morning, but the ache was nothing compared to the hollow weight I'd carried these past months. Betrayal had carved me open. Silence had tested me, but endurance had kept me standing. Elaine's memory walked beside me in every step, her voice whispering to keep my head high. The courtroom filled slowly, benches creaking as neighbors, business associates, and a few strangers found their seats. Marla and Darren sat at the opposite table, sharp suits and sharper eyes. Marla avoided my gaze, though her jaw was set tight. Darren leaned back in his chair as though he'd already won. I took my place beside Ronan Drexler, the friend who'd believed me when no one else dared. He slid a reassuring glance my way, and I felt steadier. When the judge entered, the shuffle of the crowd quieted to a hush. My heart pounded in rhythm with the gavel's first strike. This was it, the moment to learn whether I would leave the courthouse as a diminished old man stripped of his name, or as a man who had stood and fought. The hearing pressed forward with a deliberate rhythm. Ronan laid out the evidence with precision. Documents signed years ago, Elaine's careful files, signatures compared side by side. Each forgery revealed itself under the judge's steady gaze. My daughter's handwriting betrayed her more than I ever could have. Then came the breaking point. Ronan presented testimony from Opal Ridley. Calm, precise. She recounted what she had overheard in hushed voices across her fence. Marla speaking of papers Dad won't remember signing. The words carried through the courtroom like a cold wind. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Vennet, do you dispute this witness? Marla's hands trembled, though she tried to steady them by clutching Darren's arm. He pulled away. For the first time, she looked small, her power unraveling not by my hand, but by her own words. The ruling came down like thunder. The court found Marla and Darren guilty of fraud and attempted exploitation. Control over my assets was stripped from them permanently. My rights, my dignity, restored. The silence afterward was deafening. Darren cursed under his breath, his mask cracking, but it was Marla who broke completely. She wept, not soft tears, but loud, bitter sobs that rattled through the benches. Her voice rose above the stillness. I only wanted security. I stood then, my knees stiff, but my back unbending. My reply was calm, firm, and free of anger. Security is built on love and trust, Marla, not theft, not lies. The judge's gavel struck again, but it didn't silence her cries. Darren stormed out, his shoes echoing down the hallway. The world had seen enough. My daughter's downfall had played out in front of neighbors, friends, and strangers alike. During recess, Clara ran into my arms, her face streaked with tears. She was old enough to understand now, yet still young enough to ache for the love of both her mother and her grandfather. She clung to me and whispered, "Don't give up on me, Grandpa." Please don't let her lies take me away, too. My throat tightened, but I steadied my voice. You are my heart, Clara. You'll never lose me. For a moment, I felt Elaine's hand on my shoulder, as though she too had embraced our granddaughter. Clara's promise echoed inside me. She would walk beside me, no matter what storm her mother created. When the final gavel fell and court adjourned, I stepped out into the chill air, free in a way I hadn't been in years. Neighbors nodded respectfully. Some even patted my back, no longer swayed by Marla's whispers. They had seen the truth for themselves. Later that evening, I sat in Elaine's old chair, Clara's small hand folded into mine. The house was quiet, but not empty. For once, silence wasn't a burden. It was peace. The kind of peace earned after a long fight. The kind of peace Elaine had always prayed for me to have. I thought back over the months, every cold dismissal, every lie, every ambush. I hadn't just regained my home or my accounts. I had regained something far greater, the truth. My dignity had been tested, nearly stolen, but it remained mine to carry. Betrayal cuts deep, but I had learned that silence, when chosen, can roar louder than anger. And as long as Clara walked beside me, Elaine's love would never leave this house. Family can betray you, money can blind you, but dignity, that is the inheritance no one can ever steal.